Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being at our Sunfest. You probably heard this is the first time we've ever had a Sunfest, and we've been dreaming about it for 5 years, so it feels awesome to be here, and it's part of our mission, of course, to foster community engagement and to really get to know our readers and our newsmakers, and we're just really grateful that you guys took time out to come today. And as you know, we're in this room to talk about wolves, a very controversial topic in Colorado. So we know that wolves were wiped out of our state in the 1940s, hunted, trapped, poisoned, and we know that in 2020, Colorado voters, overwhelmingly in the cities, voted for reintroduction of wolves. And this meant that Colorado Parks and Wildlife had until the end of this year to transplant wolves into our state. In the meantime, a handful of wolves, maybe 2 packs, have naturally moved into our state from Wyoming. One pack crossed the state line up in Jackson County, in Walden area, and the other in the very far northwestern county of the state, Moffett County. So I'd like to introduce our panelists that are going to help us do this conversation today. First, we have Don Gittleson. I first met Don in January 2022 after the wolves that came down from Wyoming caused the death of 3 of his cows, injured another cow. The wolves also killed 2 dogs that belonged to one of his neighbors. And when I say neighbor, I mean really far away, because it's a really vast land up there in Jackson County. And when I met Don and his wife Kim, they were red-eyed and exhausted from basically staying up night after night, seeing if wolves were on their property and trying to keep their calves and cows safe. And I will say Don never wanted to be, kind of the go-to guy in the wolf discussion, but that's where he is now, and he's driven all the way from Walden this morning to be here with us. Next to Don, we have Eric Odell. Eric is the Wolf Conservation Program Manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and that agency has spent the last 2 years convening many meetings all around the state and trying to come up with a reintroduction plan that was satisfactory to the state, the federal government, the ranchers, the environmentalists, wolf advocates. Pretty hard and maybe impossible task to satisfy everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Ross, and I'm the Colorado Sun's Rural Economic Development Reporter. And thanks so much for coming. This is a very exciting panel to get to moderate. I would like to introduce Suzanne Asha Stone, who is the co-founder of the Wood River Wolf Project in Blaine County, Idaho, my home state. And it promotes the coexistence of livestock and wolves by proactively using non-lethal measures to prevent depredation. She's also the director of the International Wildlife Coexistence Network, which helps communities transform wildlife conflicts into non-violent, sustainable solutions. She flew here last night from Jackson, Wyoming, where she was giving a talk, I think, on wolves. And we're happy to have her here. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you, nice to be here.
Okay, we're going to kick off the first question to Eric. Eric, could you please give us a recap of the wolf reintroduction plan that was just approved? Give us some of the highlights and the work that's gone on for the last couple years on that. And also, if you could talk about where might we get these wolves by the end of the year, if that's possible?
Sure. Thanks, and thanks for coming to the panel, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this. I'm Eric Odell. I'm the Wolf Conservation Program Manager for Parks and Wildlife, and I'm the biological and technical lead for the Wolf Project. So as soon as the ballot passed in November of 2020, that began a very long process, what turned into be a long process, to develop a plan to restore and manage wolves. So when the ballot passed, it became state law, and that as state employees, that's what we do, is we implement the state law. And so by statute, we had to develop a plan that described how we would reintroduce animals, what recovery goals would look like, how we would handle conflict that came up, both positive and negative conflict, and several other aspects that were statutorily required. In order to kind of accomplish that goal, we convened two separate groups specific to the Wolf Project. One was a stakeholder group, and they represented everybody from the wolf advocates to the ranchers and hunters and outfitters, county commissioners, and others as well. And then a technical working group, which was more science-based, people that had real practical experience both in wolf management and wolf reintroduction. Several people that were on our technical group were also very intimately involved in the reintroductions to Yellowstone and central Idaho in the mid-90s. So those groups met monthly for about a year and a half, and they were providing guidance. They did not have the decision-making authority to develop this plan, but they provided guidance to staff as we did that. That began in, I can't remember the date, but it ended in August of 2022. Then we began a really intensive process to draft a plan. Staff did, and we put this plan together. Also, there were several public comment, not several, but many public comment opportunities at our Parks and Wildlife Commission meetings, at our stakeholder advisory meetings. And taking all of that into consideration, we put a plan together that was presented as a draft in December of 2020. The commission gave us direction as to how things should change, and then we presented a final draft in May of this year, May of 23. And our commission is also a very broad, diverse representation of consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife users, agricultural producers, and others. If you asked me in November of 2020, when we began this process, what that process would look like and what the overall acceptance of our wolf plan would look like, considering who had to vote on it, there's no way that I would have anticipated what happened, which was a unanimous support. The entire commission supported the plan, which I think is a really good testament to the process that we took and how inclusive and intentional we were to listen to people about what wolf restoration and ultimately what wolf management in Colorado should look like. So that was the process, and that was kind of phases 1 and 2, the public process, the plan writing process, and now we're into phase 3, which is thinking about implementation. How do we implement this wolf management? We do have a statutory deadline of the end of this calendar year, end of December, and we're working hard to do that. We've convened several internal teams. We've had several discussions with states and other potential areas to source wolves. We don't have anything confirmed yet, but I'm not concerned at all. We will have a source of wolves. And we will be able to begin our reintroductions prior to the end of this calendar year. We've got lots of equipment. We've hired more staff on. We've got a wolf researcher. We've got a wolf data manager that's starting up next month. We've got a really good team of people that are going to be ready to do this. And so the process will be to capture wolves in the source sites, bring them back, transport them back to Colorado, and do releases in Colorado. The wolves, by statute, wolves have to be reintroduced west of the Continental Divide. That doesn't mean that wolves will stay only on the Continental Divide. In fact, the wolves in North Park are not west of the Continental Divide. North Park is in the front, or not the Front Range, but the eastern slope. So wolves will go all over the state. We've also constrained where releases will happen by putting a 60-mile buffer around our neighboring states so that the wolves that we reintroduce don't immediately go into another state, neighboring state. So constraining that, it becomes a pretty small area, but we're really focusing, especially in the northern part of that right now. So in this Eagle, Summit, Grand counties is where we're trying to focus our ideas as to where reintroductions will happen. We're not going to be really precise on that for the safety of the animals, for the safety of people, those kinds of things, but we are working very intentionally with the local communities and having those discussions with producers, with county commissioners and other elected officials, and people will know about this ahead of time. So that's the immediate plans. The plan also talks about wolf recovery. You know, it's not a federal recovery goal, so we're a state wildlife agency. We're not dealing with wolves that are federally protected. Well, we are dealing with wolves that are federally protected, but it's not our role to work on that federal delisting process from the Federal Endangered Species Act. So we're working with the Fish and Wildlife Service on some policy tools too. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But we anticipate beginning our reintroductions within the next 3 months is where we'll be with that.
Just a quick follow-up on that, Eric. Is there another state that has agreed to give Colorado wolves? Can you say?
Yeah, we don't have no formal agreements yet. hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have something to say.
So interesting. Thank you. This question is for Suzanne. Why does Colorado need wolves?
Oh boy. I think if you asked every person in this room, you might come up with a different answer to that question. And it's really about, what people value. And I guess I'd go back and ask the wolf first. Why would you want to be here? I think Colorado, we know, offers the best habitat for wolves in the entire western United States. It is a place that wolves have been here for, I think the archaeological record shows 700,000 years. They've been here long, 500,000 years, at least more than what humans have. So Colorado is very important to wolves and to the connectivity of wolves between the northern Canadian wolves, which are not Canadian wolves, but they're all part of the gray wolves that go all the way down through the northern Rockies and then down through the south to where they meet up against the Mexican wolf. But I asked that question too of a lot of people who are from Colorado, so some of those folks are in this room, and what they told me was habitat restoration. They wanted healthy ungulate populations. They want an ecosystem balance, and because wolves are beautiful and awesome animals. They said because they are native to our land and help balance nature. There are comments about, how about the aspen trees? They're all but extinct. They're building 10-foot chain link fences so the overpopulated elk and deer won't eat new saplings and chew the bark off of healthy trees and compromise them. Any arborist can drive through the state and tell you that the forests are dying, and not just from the deer and elk, but from climate change. And so by providing wolves back on the ground, you're adding one more thing that makes the overall biodiversity of our ecosystem more resilient. Wolves are known as a keystone species. They have a tremendous influence, also because they have a superpower. And nobody ever really talks about what their superpower is, but it's their sense of smell. They have this amazing olfactory sense. And I have watched them in places, Yellowstone in particular, because you can get a really good view of this, where they will run through a huge herd of elk and within moments detect which elk is the most unhealthy. And they all, at that point, the decision is made. They'll run past other elk, all of them, going after that one particular elk. And what the researchers in Yellowstone found after going back and looking at the carcasses was that, yes, that particular elk was either injured, was very, very old and starting to get arthritic, was diseased. I mean, it just was remarkable. So given that chronic wasting disease is a huge concern for our western elk populations, deer, others, we need wolves. We need them in the ecosystems in which they were born, and that is across the entire western United States where there is still habitat to support them, where there still is elk and deer in healthy numbers. So I think it really depends on who you ask. When we brought wolves back to Idaho, one of the key players in this responsible for bringing them back was the Nez Perce tribe. And I asked the elders that question, why do you want them back in Idaho? And they told me that it was because that wolves were their elders, that they had considered them family, and that part of their culture had been missing for generations, and that bringing wolves back meant restoring that, the integrity and the sacredness of that relationship that they held with wolves. So I hope that we get to see a day when we restore wolves to Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Don, can you share with us some of the impact to ranchers from these wolves that have naturally migrated to your ranch specifically?
Well, the wolves, as a single wolf or even as two together, at least in the cattle side of things, probably be different for the sheep industry, are not really an issue. Once they become a pack, it becomes a big issue. So I would imagine in this state, the elk and deer winter down on closer to private property, and so they'll be their food source is going to be very close to where they're going to have problems. And the first mature cow that we lost we had an elk herd probably 1.5 miles from where the cows were, and the wolves went after the elk herd, and they chased a cow elk into our herd and scattered the cows. And then we ended up with 2 cows injured, one bad enough we had to put down. They had injured the elk, and then they also killed a coyote at the same time. So it started from them chasing elk into cattle. They quickly learned that cattle are not as fast as elk. And so this problem may happen again.
And you've tried burros, flagery, maybe explain what that is. Tell us some of the things that you've tried to mitigate.
So we have tried a lot of different things. I personally prefer animals as opposed to anything that's man-made has a time limit on it. It has an expiration date. It's going to work for a certain period of time, and then it's going to quit working. So all of those things rely on the wolf being afraid that me or those things are either going to hurt it or kill it. And when they realize that's not going to happen, they'll lose that fear. And that happened faster than I was hoping it would at our place. But so some of the things we tried, we used fox lights. They did not work one day. And in this state, people are going to have to realize that some things will last for quite a while and some things won't last at all. And they're going to need to be ready to make changes quickly. They're going to have other things lined up that will work. So people, although intentions are good, they wear out. And the time that you need to be out with wolves primarily is midnight to 4 a.m. And we had people out, and even ourselves. Typically, we started around 10:30 till 7:30, and then we tried to narrow it down because people get wore out, and that's really a bad time to have to stay awake. So some of the animals stay awake through the night. Cattle do not. One of the problems we had with people was watching for wolves is not what you need to be doing. You need to be watching the other animals, because the other animals know when the wolves come in. People do not. So that, and then I would have to say it's a lot like if you go on a diet, how long before you give up the diet? So that's a lot like watching for wolves. You go into it really excited, and after a while you lose the excitement. Wolves don't come in every single night. They're very hard to predict when they're going to come in. CPW worked with us a lot, trying to notify us when the wolves were in proximity, when they were a long way away. The collar data is not really an effective tool for that, which is what a lot of people are going to think they can count on. So if they contact me and tell me the collar is a mile away, it means this: that wolf will be here in a matter of minutes, or he might be here in 3 weeks, depending on what he decides to do. And they've had the wolves a long way away over the mountain range and tell me, Don, if you need sleep, this would be a good night to do it. And they'll be back that night. So you're dealing with a very intelligent animal. The sense of smell is they have an extremely good sense of smell. I think they can pick up a human scent when I see them at night, probably somewhere between 300-400 yards away. But at our place, having people out at night with vehicles wore out in about 3 months or less. And then they would come in even though the people were there, because we weren't a threat. So we stopped having other people come in because the person who was helping, the group that were helping, she was paying people, and I told her I don't see the point in paying people when I'm going to have to be out there anyway. So we took back, we started doing it ourselves again. But it wasn't until, we got a lot more aggressive with chasing the wolves off that they started to leave us alone more, but then they moved on to other ranches. That kind of got a break when Wyoming happened and 3 wolves were killed up there. And then now we're back to where there's not a pack of wolves. There are a number of wolves there, but they're not running in a pack. So there may be 2 wolves at a time, sometimes only 1, and those, to me, don't really represent a threat to my cattle. So.
Thank you very much, Don. I have had the pleasure of getting to do some reporting about wolves in Alaska, specifically the East Fork Pack in Denali National Park. And I got to go snowmobiling for 210 miles with a trapper, spent some time on that side, and then got to spend a bunch of time in the park observing a den with a biologist. And one of the things that the trappers and hunters in Alaska say is there's the wolf army and the human army, and we're fighting for resources. And we know that moose are one of wolves' choice non-domestic animals to prey on. And so this is for Eric. I was wondering, what do we know about how a pack or 2 or 3 will impact game numbers here in Alaska and therefore hunters? Or sorry, Colorado.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not ready to talk about how they'll do in
Yeah.
Alaska. So a pack or 2 or 3 of wolves will eat elk and probably cattle too. Wherever wolves and livestock share the landscape, there will be conflict. Our hope is that that conflict is minimized and mitigated to the greatest extent possible. So the hope is that, the intent is that wolves are preying on the native ungulates that are in the state, and there's a lot of deer and elk in the state. It's not universal. It's not, the distribution of deer and elk throughout the state, and even on the West Slope is variable. There is some areas where there's really high productivity, some areas where there's really low productivity. A pack of 6 or 8 animals, an individual wolf will eat somewhere between 18 to 20 elk per year, per animal. So you can do some calculations and figure out how big of an impact one pack will have. You relate that to the overall number of elk that we have in the state, and it's a pretty small number, right? From a big scale population number. 2 or 3 packs, you double or triple that number, and you can kind of calculate back of the envelope what that impact might be. To a population biologist that's looking at the whole spectrum of elk populations throughout the state, that's a very small number when we're talking about the hundreds of thousands of elk that we have. To the hunter that's really used to hunting in that particular valley, it may change the number of elk. It may change the distribution of elk too. They will learn and they will avoid some areas as well. So the local impacts are probably not going to be great. We do not anticipate that wolves will demolish or annihilate the ungulate packs, or the ungulate herds that we have in the state. But there will be changes, and elk will change behavior, change distribution, things like that. So, an individual pack or two is probably not a big issue. The population will start small. The population of wolves will start small. It's 2 animals that we know of right now. When we begin our reintroductions, and that's going to be a multi-year effort. It's coming back to a little bit of the plan. We'll reintroduce 10 to 15. The plan is to reintroduce 10 to 15 animals a year for 3 to 5 years. So we're starting on a very small scale, but that population will grow quickly. Wolves are very productive. And so we anticipate that population will grow to hundreds in short times, and so probably in 10 to 20 packs maybe in 5 to 10 years. These are all just kind of estimates at this point. So at that point we will have a lot more wolves than we will with just 1 or 2 packs. But again, the impacts to the ungulate populations are probably at a big scale, at the population scale, not that great. At a local scale, there could be very obvious kinds of changes, both in behavior and distribution.
Are you already hearing from hunters about this issue?
For sure, yeah, it's an issue that we hear about a lot, and we hear the concern expressed that wolves will have a huge impact on deer and elk populations. And we don't know. There's still viable hunting seasons for ungulates in states where wolves have been for a long time, and so Idaho, Montana, Wyoming all have deer and elk hunting seasons, regulated hunting seasons. So we don't expect that it's ever going to be the end of hunting seasons. I think there's a lot of fear about what wolves bring to the state. There's a lot of unknown fear that comes from the hunters and sportsmen and sports people, as well as from the producers. And so we're learning as we're going along with this. We've learned a lot with the pack that has established in North Park. We've learned a lot with all of these public meetings that we've had too, in terms of what the concerns are. And we have plans to address those concerns and to help mitigate those concerns. So we have heard those concerns both from the hunting public as well as from the producer public as well.
Thank you, Eric. And you all might want to weigh in on this question, but it's been a huge point of controversy in terms of if wolves are attacking cattle, what kind of lethal or non-lethal action can ranchers take? Maybe, Eric, you could start and explain what the plan actually says, and if Suzanne and Don, you want to weigh in on whether that's satisfactory. I mean, I guess we're basically asking, like, if that's the measures we have, is it worth it?
Yeah, it's an important question, and it's a complicated answer because of the status of wolves. So wolves, as I said earlier on, wolves are in Colorado. They're federally protected under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. They're a federally endangered species, and that's different from the state status as well. So as a federal status species, what the Endangered Species Act says is that take is prohibited, and take is not only lethal take, but also lots of hazing and harassing and chasing and those kinds of things. By the law, by Endangered Species Act law, those are illegal acts. Those cannot be done to any kind of endangered species, wolves or otherwise. So we've worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to develop a rule that's ongoing, and it's what's called the 10J rule. Because it's in Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act. And it's the same tool, the same rule that's been used for wolf restoration in the very highly endangered Mexican wolf subspecies down in Arizona, New Mexico, and the country of Mexico, as well as the wolves that were reintroduced into the northern Rockies. All of those populations had 10J rules that were effective rules. And so what that does is it relaxes some of those take prohibitions. So it says there are certain conditions where take is allowed, where harassment is allowed, whether it's non-lethal, and there's even some instances where lethal take of wolves is allowed. And what those are is if a producer was in the situation where they were to see a wolf chasing livestock, not just chasing but attacking, tooth on hide kind of a thing, where the attack is imminent, the producer can kill that wolf, can lethally remove that wolf in that situation. That's not a point in time when you try to deploy non-lethal tools, right? You're not going to string up flattery when the wolf is chasing cows. The other situation where a producer could take a wolf is in a chronic depredation situation where there's just depredation that's ongoing. Lots of practices have been tried and deemed to not be successful to mitigate that take. And so that's when there's a chronic depredation situation. Primarily that would be done by agency staff, federal or state agency staff, but if there are certain circumstances, certain conditions, then a private producer could do that. Those are only allowed, I want to be clear, those are only allowed if the 10J is finalized. Right now, it's been in the media quite a bit. The Fish and Wildlife Service just recently released their final environmental impact statement. They've gone through the whole NEPA process to do that. So the final EIS has been released, and the record of decision, the draft record of decision, has been recently released. And now they're in this process of, it's just a federal process to make that rule effective. We anticipate that will be done prior to the releases at the end of December, but as of today, right now, lethal take is not allowed of wolves in the state because the 10J is not effective. If the wolves were to be federally delisted, then the 10J is no longer effective. That's only a federal rule, but there's still state regulations and state requirements about lethal take of wolves because it's still a state endangered species. So primarily we're understanding that there is going to be impacts, that there is going to be conflict from wolves. We've developed some tools and worked with our partners at the federal agencies to develop those tools so that we can have some of that management flexibility that we think is really important. And that came not only from our stakeholder advisory group representatives, but also the technical group that we convened that I mentioned earlier that all said, these tools are really, really important. From a biological perspective, the removal of a wolf or two is not, from a population perspective, is not a big deal. The wolves, again, are very productive animals, and so that the pack will persist as long as it's an individual or something like that. So from a biological perspective, those kinds of activities we don't believe will be a long-term impact to the success of what our ultimate goal is, which is to restore wolves to the state.
Suzanne?
Yeah, and thank you. I'd like to just clarify a few things because I think there's a lot of confusion. And we've seen this happen in state after state of when wolves come back. It happened in Idaho, it happened in Montana, it happened in Wyoming, Oregon, Washington. So, and it's really happening now in Colorado as well. There's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of fear, a lot of confusion over what to expect and how to best address having wolves on the ground. And I think part of the reason that we're working in Colorado is we'd like to help bring some of those lessons from those other states so that Colorado doesn't have to go through all the hard knocks that other states had in learning these things. You want to learn from others' mistakes. Certainly we made a ton in Idaho. I think one mistake is to assume that all hunters are against having wolves back. That is, when we first got wolves back in Idaho, I got a call from a hunter, and I kind of was in that boat of I thought all hunters didn't like them, most anyway. Not true. And he called to tell me that when he was going out on an elk hunt, that he got packed half of it out, was going back in to get the rest of it, and found wolf tracks on his trail. This is a year or two after we brought wolves back. And he sat there that morning and from a distance through his scopes, watching these wolves finish off the rest of his elk. And he said it was just the most magical experience that he had ever had, and thank you so much for bringing wolves back. So I think that's one thing. We got to recognize that there's ranchers even who want to have wolves back. I work with a lot of them. And that I think what we've learned from Don's situation, and I was there about 3 months after his loss, Don was explaining to me the things that he had tried, and he'd been hit with so many things coming at him at the same time and didn't really know which of those things was really the best way to handle it. I think we learned from that situation that we need to be more proactive about making sure that we treat each situation as its own and do a really good analysis of what's needed there. So Don shared with me that the flattery that they had put up had never been put up around the entire enclosure at his place. That within a week, that the wind had taken it down, and 3 months later, a lot of the flattery was on the ground. When flattery's not installed properly, it's like trying to run your car engine without the spark plugs. It doesn't work. And so making sure that we're using the right tools at the right time is really effective. We've put, Don's ranch is actually really small where he has his cattle during the wintertime compared to what we installed a fence around the Voyagers National Park ranch. I think there's 7-8 miles of the ranch. And that was a situation where we really needed to go with more of a sturdy permanent fencing. I don't think that's the case with with Don's, but certainly if wolves decide that that is the place they need to be, then there are other options that would keep wolves off that ranch. The other thing that the ranchers need to be aware of is that superpower that wolves have, the olfactory. They are not just hunters. In fact, when you talk about wolves eating 18 to 20 elk per year, some of those are scavenged. Wolves love to scavenge. I mean, everybody likes a free meal, right? So, they're looking for the easiest, lowest hanging fruit because it's dangerous taking down an elk. If you only have these 4 teeth that are your primary goal of using to bring down an elk, you're going to have to be really careful about which elk you pick. And that's even more so when it comes to moose, because one moose can kill a wolf like that. So you just have to kind of see the world through their eyes. What would draw these wolves to the ranch to begin with? And that is often their sense of smell. What we found time and time again in other states is that the wolves always came to the place where there were either dead livestock or there was some kind of illness within the livestock herd, something that made the livestock extra vulnerable. And Don's situation was different because he had elk running to escape wolves jumping onto his ranch, so the wolves just basically accidentally ended up there. But it's, you have to be looking at this proactively. So making sure that we have these plans in place, that we have people out doing site evaluations on all of these ranches to help them understand what are the best tools. How can I avoid inviting wolves to eat at my place? We don't want to invite them here. We want to make sure that they know this isn't a place. And when they start taking interest in that area, things like fox lights, flattery, the bright lights, the air horns, all that kind of stuff can be extremely effective. We have 25,000 sheep, which wolves and everything else kills more sheep than they do cattle. And they're the most vulnerable livestock on the landscape. We have 25,000 sheep in our project area. It's 1,200 square kilometers of some of the most rugged country in this country, in Idaho. And on average, of those 25,000 sheep in our project area, where we also have a heavy concentration of wolves, out of the 25,000, we lose less than 5 a year to wolves because we are proactively using these deterrents in the right way, testing them, changing them with things that don't work, and making sure that we're applying them in ways that best help the ranchers in our area. That's what we need for Colorado. I think the only other thing I wanted to say is that, that I think if we work together, to put all this energy working together, that we can solve this. This is not a hard thing to solve. And we can spend less money by being proactive in making sure that we have those deterrents in place, that we're ready for wolves on the ground, than having to pay for them afterwards when you have train wreck after train wreck because we weren't ready. Thank you.
Don?
I'm sorry.
Are you satisfied with what's in the reintroduction plan about compensation and ability to take lethal action?
Well, for one thing, with Colorado, because of the differences we've had with animals listed as endangered or threatened at the state level or the federal level, and that has changed while I've been involved with this. So if that continues to change and the rules change with that, so that's going to be hard for the ranchers to stay on top of. The 10J rule, they're definitely going to need that. It's going to be something that's going to be required. As far as the compensation, that's something that I don't think most of you understand. When I hear comments about it, so the rancher has to prove that there are wolves there, and when I say that will be with the help of CPW too. There have to be wolves. You have to show that that animal was alive before it was eaten on. And at our place, we were kind of lucky because all those animals were found within 12 hours or less. The first calf that we had, at a particular time, the wolves were a mile away. The male's collar was a mile from the ranch. 4 hours later, that collar was where that animal was dead. 4 hours after that, they were 5 miles away. So within a time frame of 8 hours, they almost consumed the evidence that that calf was alive. And so any animal that doesn't get found in a very short period of time, the evidence that the rancher is going to need to prove that that animal was alive prior to it being eaten on could disappear. That's a problem. There are some things that wolves won't eat. There are 3 things that I know of as far as in the cattle portion that they won't eat. So if that animal's out there dead, it's really not going to make much difference because they're not going to feed on it, and it's not going to. I can't tell you exactly why they won't do it. I can just tell you they won't do that. Neither will the coyotes. Black bears are not quite as picky, but there are things that they will not eat. And so some of that we have used as a deterrent. I don't know if we've been successful or not. We haven't lost one to a wolf that I was trying that with, but that doesn't, I don't know. I actually thought they would try to kill one and then decide they wouldn't eat it, and then after a while give up trying to kill something that they didn't like to eat. So I don't know if those things will work, but
That's great, thank you. We're going to ask one more question and then let you all have a chance to ask some. And, you know, as I stated at the beginning, you know, this measure to reintroduce wolves was voted on primarily by the Front Range cities, and the Western Slope counties where the wolves are going to go overwhelmingly voted no. There's actually a sign in North Park that says, if you voted for wolf reintroduction, turn around and drive home, or something to that effect. So I just want to ask any of you that feel like weighing in, but what does that vote say about, you know, Colorado's urban-rural divide? And, you know, the point of our whole Sunfest here is to talk about creating a better Colorado. So, you know, part of this conversation is to try to understand each other. But any thoughts or comments about, you know, that actual vote and where we can go from here to try to understand where each other's coming from?
Why are you guys looking at me? Okay, I'll go jump in. Yeah, that's a big question. I think understanding each other it's really important, but it's like we're often coming at this from very different perspectives. So for me, as a mother and a grandmother, I'm very concerned about the state of our planet. I'm very concerned about climate change. I'm very concerned about the loss of biodiversity. We've lost 3 billion birds in North America in just the last 40 years. We're losing insect populations at rates that we can't afford to, pollinators, all of those things. So I'm thinking about what do we need in order to protect what we have and to restore, rewild, and coexist with nature in a way that's sustainable. Because the actions we do all the time, every day, right now, they were okay when there was just 1 billion of us on the planet. but there's almost 9 billion people now on this planet. And what we've seen is that our cattle, our chickens, all of that is replacing the natural biodiversity on the planet. That we make up between humans and cattle and sheep, goats, all our domestic livestock. We make up collectively about 94% of the biomass on planet Earth. That leaves 4%, 5% for everybody else. And we're going to lose so much. And it's not just about these wonderful species that we're losing. It's about our own safety, our own food resources, our own way of life. And so we can't continue to act now like there's not 9 billion people here. We've got to start acting every day like we are invested in protecting what's out there. And the wolf is one of the key species when it comes to helping restore and keep an ecosystem in balance by moving elk around. That's one thing, that elk behavior will change. They will forget that they think that they're cattle. They'll start moving again, and that will give a chance for the little saplings to start regrowing, and then you'll start seeing things like regrowth of forests, and you'll see beaver coming back for sometimes the first time in many, many years. We think what we see out there right now is normal. It is not. That is not the way that this planet was designed to work. And so understanding what does nature need in order to help sustain us, we have to also be asking, what do we need in order to sustain nature? And those two are so interconnected. So by working with the people who are on the land and helping them, maybe, it's not just wolves, maybe someday we'll see bison back. It was about the same time that we saw wolves being exterminated from this landscape, Native Americans, indigenous people being thrown out of their homelands. We saw the loss of the bison that were here as well. And there is a way for us to restore and work in balance with those species that were evolved to help support and maintain a resilient, strong, natural world here. We just have to be courageous enough to take everybody's hand here and say, we can do this. We can work together and create a strong, beautiful Colorado that will sustain generations to come. Not just of the two-leggeds, but all the four-leggeds, all the creepy crawlers, all of those things that are inherent in our ecosystem here and that are all playing such an important role in it. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I've learned throughout this process for the last couple of years is not to generalize. And Suzanne made a good comment, and I hope I didn't overgeneralize in my statement about the concern that we've heard from hunters and other sportsmen. There's lots of people that have said, yes, I'm in this field that may have suffered some conflict from wolves, and that's okay, and I'm okay with that. So I want to be careful to say that it's not a universal truth that all hunters are opposed to wolves. That is not the case. And one of the points that Don mentioned earlier, if wolves go back and forth between the Federal Endangered Species Act, which they have through this whole planning process, that there's the likelihood for confusion. We've been very careful to structure our plan very, very similarly to what the 10J rule says as well. And so if there is the instance where wolves are federally delisted, for the most part, rules won't change. And so that was very intentional because we don't want to create confusion. We want to have this consistent kind of messaging and management tools of how we can manage wolf populations. So I just want to make those two kind of clarification or comment points. That said, not to generalize, I mean, there's lots of hopes that we hear from the wolf advocate types about how wolves will do all of these things, and you see YouTube videos of how wolves will save rivers, how wolves will, chase the elk around, move them around, and there will be more willows, and more willows means more songbirds and more insects and all of those things. You hear the fear from producers that wolves were going to demolish the livestock industry as a whole. I don't think either of those statements are truths. And we're working really hard. The agency is working really hard to collect a lot of empirical data, and we will have a story to tell years from now as we reintroduce wolves. We see how elk behave, we see how elk numbers change, and we see how livestock production changes, both in the sense of direct impacts as well as the indirect impacts, loss of weight gains, loss of pregnancy rates, things like that. And we'll also have data on how habitat is affected, if habitat is affected. Some areas we expect that there will be habitat changes from having wolves on the landscape. Those are the areas where there is not already these other kinds of pressures that ungulate populations already face. So lots to learn in this whole process. Relative to the vote, it's true. I mean, if you look at the maps that we have in our plan that outline, that demonstrate where the precinct level votes came from, by and large, the support for this came from the Front Range. That's a statement, not necessarily just about wolves, but about the population of Colorado as a whole and how Colorado views wildlife. We are, as an agency, challenged with a lot of very challenging questions, some of which are how do we remain relevant to the whole state? Wolves and beyond. I mean, how we manage state parks, all of those kinds of things. I'm not here to talk about any of that, but it's something that we recognize. I think that's just the important piece, is that as state wildlife agency and many state agencies throughout the state, we recognize that there's very diverse publics. Not only, again, not to generalize just Front Range versus West Slope, but those are challenges that we deal with not only for wolves, but for many different kinds of management decisions that we make, both on the wildlife side of things and on the state park side of things that our agency manages. So I don't have an answer to it, but that's just something that we're aware of.
So as far as the vote, I think probably if 114 had gone about things a little differently, it had been a little more palatable for people on the western slope. So instead of saying we're going to release wolves only on the western slope, it probably would have been better if it would have been statewide. That probably also would have affected the vote, but it would have been a lot more palatable for people on the western slope, because what that ended up doing was having a group of people who are not going to be impacted by this, inflicting something that will impact other people. So how that came about probably wasn't the best choice as far as having people on the western slope accept it. As far as some of the other things, so on our place, we have plenty of willows and aspen trees. Actually, what we didn't have were beaver, and actually worked with CPW to get some brought in there a few years ago. Unfortunately, when beavers get on the land, they are an easy meal for a wolf. And so some of the first ones we brought in there probably have pretty much been eliminated. They brought me, I think at least 8 more this year to put in a couple of the streams that we have. So one of the other issues that we do have with the wolf thing is people extremely concerned about the wolves and less concerned about the other animals on the landscape. And some of the things that were brought to me as ideas to use that I turned down were things that were going to affect other animals on the landscape. So if what I do to protect my cattle affects the antelope, the mule deer, the elk, the moose, and every other animal that I have that crosses my land, then it's probably not a good idea. And we had some ideas that possibly would have worked on the wolves, but the effect they would have had on a lot of other animals on that place, I didn't think that was a choice that we needed to use. So.
Thank you. Okay, we have just a few minutes left if anyone from the audience would like to ask one of these guys a question.
And I just need to jump in and clarify one thing here, that Minnesota in our country has the largest wolf population in the entire country, over 2,000 wolves, 3,000 at one point. Also has one of the most vigorous, largest beaver populations in the country. Wolves don't decimate, other animals. They are important to be part of that whole ecosystem, yes, but they coexist quite well with our native wildlife.
In the front.
When Mr. Gittleson said it's okay if there's one or two wolves, but when you get a pack, that's a problem. Wolf packs are their families. That's how they have to find food from their families. And I'm pushing back with your statement about the urban rural divide. I've been working on Prop 114 since 2018, and research out from the Werner Institute said that 80% of Colorado's favored Proposition 114. People from every county in the state voted for 114. During the campaign, 5-1, money from Safari Club International, Big Ag, the 5-1 more negative hate-filled ads in our newspapers across the state caused a difference during the election day. But to say that it's an urban-rural divide and we aren't affected, the public lands belong to all of us. They are a public doctrine. We need to protect our public lands. When wolves help with the biodiversity crisis, it's the biggest crisis facing our nation. And that is a gift to the Western Slope and to us. And so wolves will be a gift to us and help with our biodiversity. And to say it's a divide and to come up with a statement like just turn around, that promotes the fear and loathing that people are getting bad myths about the big bad wolf, which are totally myths. Thank you.
I've got a question for Eric. I saw probably well over a year ago that Idaho, Montana, Wisconsin, there were special interest groups that were moving along to try to keep state agencies from donating any wolves to Colorado. I was just wondering, have y'all made any efforts to get them from Alberta again? Like with, y'all talking to U.S. Fish and Wildlife and more from Alberta, which was what they did to get to the Yellowstone and the first place.
Yeah, we recognize that. We have not reached out to Canadian provinces yet. No.
In the
The
back?
Canadians might take a look at how we've treated wolves in the Northern Rockies and say no anyway. I mean, we really have to be careful with our northern neighbors because they're not happy with how we're treating wolves in the Northern Rockies today. I hear from them all the time.
Got two questions. Don, just curious how many of the North Park have coexisted with wolves the last couple of decades. And, what's your take on reintroduction to the work? And then secondly, for Eric and Suzanne, could you explain more the situation in Utah and how that, or Wyoming and how that could change? Just heard reports of people at the border as wolves cross.
You want to go first?
I've been asked to go first. So, Wyoming is, the status of wolves is different in Colorado and Wyoming. In Wyoming and Idaho and Montana and the eastern portions of Oregon and Washington, wolves are federally delisted. When that federal delisting happens, they have to maintain a population to keep them off of that Federal Endangered Species Act. But then they're managed by the state. And so the way Wyoming has chosen to manage wolves is they've got a protected population in the northwest corner of the state in the Yellowstone, in the Yellowstone Grand Teton National Parks, but broader than that, bigger geography than that. But outside of that, wolves are not protected, and anybody at any time can shoot a wolf. And so that's the way that wolves are managed in that state. No judgment about that. And so when wolves cross that line, cross that political boundary between Colorado and Wyoming, their status changes fundamentally, and so that's just the nature of the way of wolf management has happened in the West.
Could they change across the board, or?
I'm sorry, could they change across what?
Yeah, could there be any changes in our reintroduction, or is that just a state level?
Could they change? Could the status change in Wyoming because of our reintroduction? Probably not. No, I don't anticipate that.
All right, so as far as decades in North Park, you need to understand I grew up in Steamboat Springs. And so we moved, when we leased this ranch about 5 years ago, to North Park. So a lot prior to that, I can't tell you. And I didn't hear quite the rest of your question about that you had for me.
Well, yeah, what's your take on reintroduction in 5-10 years? Do you think it'll be a success?
I don't know. So it'll depend on how things, what happens when the wolves get here. If things, personally, I look at things to happen the same way they did at my place. We have an awful lot of people in Colorado compared to the other states. And so the chances of wolves bumping into people or places where they're going to be a problem is quite a bit higher. But like I said, at my place, when we had the one female, 1084, I knew she was there. She came, so they will come through the houses. They will come through the buildings. They did that at our place right away. When she was there, I had no issues, okay? She would actually cross where we had the calves where the first one was killed, and she didn't stop to look at them. From her tracks, I could tell she didn't stop to look at them. She didn't pursue them. She didn't pay any attention to them. She just passed through. Okay, when the male showed up, 2101, and we knew he was there at least a month prior, if not more. We notified him, but they told me when I notified them, I needed to notify them a lot faster. So the next time when we notified them was the day before they collared him. But when he showed up, things started to change a little bit. So they didn't injure anything, but they were starting to bother the cattle, and the cattle were starting to react differently. That was all that happened when there was one or two. So in this state, I would suspect when the wolves are first released, that's what you should see. If you see something other than that, we're in for a big wreck. But it's not till they had the pups, and when they had the pups, we knew then that they have to teach those things to kill. They're not born knowing how to do that. All predators have to teach their young how to kill things. We knew when that was going to happen, it was probably going to be a problem. I didn't know it was going to be a problem at my place, but we knew that there would probably be a problem. Now, part of the problem is the public, okay? And CPW needs to try to keep everybody happy in a situation where you're not going to keep everybody happy. But when we started, you were not allowed to harass those animals in any way, the wolves in any way, which was, hindsight's always really good, was probably a mistake. But we weren't able to do that until we had animals that were killed. So in this state, I think what is we're going to go through some, I would say, maybe growing pains. So when they came to our place, we were naive about wolves. The animals, the livestock, they are naive about wolves. That is probably going to happen through the rest of this state. The cattle on our place behave quite a bit differently now than they used to. So I anticipate we're going to see some of the same things happen statewide. If things happen worse than that, we're probably going to, long-term, going to be in a wreck. If everything's quiet, good. Okay.
Thanks, Don. I promise this guy a very fast question, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
I think Eric, you're probably the best one to do it. May 23rd draft, or actually might be the final plan. What staffing increases are in that document for this project?
What staffing increases are outlined in the plan? Yeah. So the plan doesn't get specific in terms of what the wolf program from a structural standpoint looks like. What I can say is that our program manager for the wolf program. We've hired another person that's going to come on as our monitoring and data person early next month. We've got a wolf researcher on, and importantly, to address the concerns that Don was just expressing and to the question that was just posed, we will make this a success. And so we've developed a really good conflict mitigation program. We've got one person that's based in North Park right now that specifically reaches out and works on a daily or weekly basis with producers in North Park. We'll have more of those type of staff hired on that will be focused specifically on that. And we've got good funding to support not only the compensation side of things when conflict happens, when depredation happens, but also a program to develop more tools and more kinds of ways to try to avoid conflict. We're never going to prevent all kind of conflict from happening, but trying to get ahead of that. So right now the program is small. Inherently, because we're growing, but we will grow. That program will grow, and we have existing staff that are all around the state that are already doing biological work and law enforcement work. And so, some of those tasks will be added to existing responsibilities. So there will be several staff that are hired on specifically for wolf issues, and existing staff will be tasked with wolf-related things. So the plan doesn't get specific in terms of what those roles and responsibilities are.
Last one, I swear. Thank you all so much for being part of our panel. Suzanne, Eric, Don, a round of applause for these guys. And thank you all for reading the Colorado Sun and for supporting our first Sunfest. And I hope that you have a day filled with really interesting conversations. We're going to transition in this room to a discussion on homelessness. So stick around for that if you want.